Hi everybody. What an adventure this has been. This is another Convos with Kim, and this time we are both in camera, hopefully. And so I'm Connie, and I'm the host of Gliding Through Blindness, and my twin sister is going to actually though be the main speaker for this particular conversation. And if you know anything about my channel, you probably know about this feature where every month I have her speak. Um, and since I'm visiting her right now, I thought that would be a good time to get us both because even when we, on our previous convos with Kim, I wasn't in camera. I meant to be, but because of reasons, I wasn't. But hopefully from now on I will. But this time we are both live in the same room, which doesn't happen all that often. So we had all kinds of issues getting the camera situated in our computer, but thanks to Ira, they came to the rescue again. So thank you, Ira, and Harmony and Sid, etc., for helping. Oh no, I'm going to turn off my screen here. There, so I guess I'll turn it over to Kim. Okay, hi everybody. So the last time on my convo, I was talking about history and the importance of history and what that has meant to me. So I had a little more to say on that topic, really a lot more, but I mean, it will probably just keep coming up in my talks. But I just kind of had a little more I wanted to say kind of as an introductory thing. So this will be like part 2, I guess, of the history talk. Oh, and did you remember to look at the time? Because I didn't. Oh, there, now I did. And so... and I think I'll take a break in December because nobody wants to think too deeply and whatever during the holidays. So this will be my November, December talk, I guess. I don't know exactly when Connie's actually going to put it up. But so anyway, last time I was talking about these homeschooling forums I was on for homeschooling parents. Since I was a homeschooling parent, I wanted to just talk to other parents that were like me, and we could all share education stories and just what we were all learning together and stuff. So I was on these homeschooling forums where history from all sides was discussed. That's the great thing about these forums. You can just get viewpoints from all different perspectives and all sides and perspectives you never dreamed of and just things you never thought about. I was just fascinated by all that. And from that, I began to get a glimmer that there's always more than one side of the story, more than one perspective that we can take. I mean, just as a simple example, I had always grown up with the Little House on the Prairie books and just thought that was such a homey, wholesome story and stuff, which it is, but I just thought of it from the writer's perspective, which of course that's what you do with most things that you read or whatever. They're coming from a certain perspective, and then when you're reading it, you are reading it from that perspective, and maybe we just don't stop to think about the other perspectives that we could take on the same story. So I had just totally loved these stories, but all of a sudden on these forums one day, the moms just kind of got to talking about Charles Ingalls, the dad, and was he actually a selfish jerk? Because all we read about is Laura's perspective from when she was a little kid, and she just loved her dad, of course, and admired how he took care of the family and everything. But maybe we should look at it from Caroline's perspective, the wife. Maybe she wasn't so thrilled about having to move all the time like Charles did. Charles just kind of had this pioneering spirit and wanted to move and be adventure all the time, so they could never settle down because he was always just wanted to move farther and farther west. And so Caroline just had to kind of go along with him and build houses with him over and over again. It's hard enough in those days to have to clean your house and whatever, but she had to continually build houses with him and continually plant and plow new fields with him while she was taking care of the house and her kids, of course, and educating her kids, because he would keep moving to places where there was no schools. So she had the responsibility of educating her kids and whatever. And in those days, it was just expected that you're going to meek and mildly follow your husband wherever he leads. So, yeah, we were just thinking about that Charles was just kind of maybe thoughtless of his family and just kind of doing what he wanted, whether that was really the best for the family or not. So, that's just an example of the kind of discussions that we would have on there sometimes. And we always tend to think that other perspectives are just so ridiculous. Like, why aren't they even thinking? But we should just always realize that there's more to the story of another perspective, too, I think. Yep. Um, so I forget if I started mentioning Christopher Columbus last time, but that's another thing that we just started talking about on the forums, whether or not we should actually even be celebrating like Columbus Day, because Columbus wasn't just this great historical hero that we hear about that bravely and courageously discovered America. I mean, he did do that, but it's because he was like a ruthless daredevil with little care for his men. Like, he didn't care if he was endangering their lives. He made them take many dangerous risks that they shouldn't have taken. Like, that's one of the things we did on these forums, is we would go back to like some of the original journals, and like we found things written by some of the men that had sailed with him and how resentful they were of him, the way he just took reckless chances with their lives. And then he finally landed here, but it wasn't like it was just a total accident. He didn't even realize that he had landed here in America. He thought he had landed in India. That's why he started calling the natives that he found here, he called them Indians, because he actually thought at first that he was in India. And then he just thought it was such a great discovery. Oh, this whole new species of people that I found. He just would like literally kidnap them, just would sneak in and take them back to Europe and show them off as Native American slaves, or sell them as slaves, or just like basically put them in a zoo and show them off for the other Spanish people and people that would come to look at this new discovery that he had made. So it was just very dehumanizing. Plus, he was just very cruel and thoughtless to them while he was there. He just like thought of them as savages and didn't respect their rights or their property at all. So I can see why, like Native Americans today, maybe they don't feel like celebrating Columbus Day. You can't really blame them for that. And maybe the rest of us should try to take a broader perspective too, as far as maybe we should, instead of celebrating Columbus, we should celebrate the natives that were here before then and all that they had to endure because of the white man's arrival here. It's kind of weird to just give that much credit to one person anyway. I mean, everything's on the backs of what came before. Like, nothing happens in a vacuum, basically. And like even great inventions, we give like Alexander Graham Bell, for example, credit for inventing the telephone, but I mean he was neck and neck with other people that were, he was just the first, but yet he gets like all the credit as though it was a very novel idea. But all these things, like, yeah, it's not just one person usually. Right, yeah, I get suspicious right away anymore when I just hear about one great man who accomplished all this. So another example would be like the Tea Party, like the Boston Tea Party, were just really a bunch of headstrong, youthful renegades that just kind of wanted to cause trouble. Just kind of no different from the people who stormed the Capitol on the infamous January 6th that just happened not too long ago. These were basically the same type of people. They destroyed properties. They just like went aboard these ships and dumped very valuable tea overboard. They weren't peaceful protesters, which nowadays we think that all protesters are supposed to be totally peaceful and never destroy anything. But yet we admire these, the original Tea Party people, just because, once again, that they did what they did a long time ago. So now we look back at them as heroes, whereas if they had done that same thing this day and age, we probably would look at them totally differently. So there were like a lot of signers of the Constitution. If you actually look at the whole story of how the Constitution was written, that was just a very human process. Now we almost tend to put this holy aura on it, like a bunch of gods got together and dictated our Constitution from on high. But like a lot of people that wrote the Constitution, they came in drunk a lot of times, and I mean, they did come up with an amazing document that was in some ways quite different from what had been written before, at least as far as like all together in one document. But most of what they put in the Constitution, they took from other sources. Um, and they just managed to get it all together into this one document that has worked pretty well for us. But I mean, it shouldn't be set in stone. Like Thomas Jefferson literally said that this needs to be updated every 50 years at the most. We should all take a look at the Constitution and see how we can improve it. Um, But we don't do that today. We just say, oh, well, this is what the founders meant, and this is how things need to be for all time. A lot of people like totally rebel against any changes being made or any reinterpretations or whatever of the Constitution. And they weren't looking out for the interests of everyone like we like to think today. They were just looking out for the interests basically of one small group of people, rich, white, land owning males. That's the only people they were taking into consideration when they wrote the Constitution. Not people who didn't own property. They thought those people were just feckless and worthless and meant to serve the land owning class. So they weren't looking out for their interests. They weren't looking out for the interests of women. They weren't looking out for the interests of black people. None of those people deserved a vote, according to the writers of the Constitution. They thought only rich, white, land-owning males should have the right to vote. So every right that we have obtained since then has been like added on to the Constitution, has been like hard fought. We had to fight hard to get anything added or any new perspectives added besides the one they wrote the Constitution with. Like I said, yet some people today act like it's a Bible or a holy book, never to be questioned. Um, Thomas Jefferson, who wrote a lot of the Constitution, wrote laws in the Constitution in support of slavery. Like that was one of the considerations he wanted to make sure we got in there, that these rich white landowners did have the right to own slaves. And he like didn't condemn the mistreatment of black people. He thought that sometimes that was necessary. And all this while he himself, he owned slaves himself, of course, but he also had a black mistress and fathered several black children who he treated as slaves. I mean, they didn't live in his house and weren't part of his family with his kids. These black children that he had with his black slave, Sally Hemings, he just treated as slaves, and they lived in the slave headquarters with all the other slaves. And so, like, you hear about, like, all men are created equal, but some are more equal than others kind of thing. I mean, it's like some people try to defend it and say, well, yeah, but he knew what the ideal was. He knew that there should be no slaves in an ideal world, but just that society he was in, he couldn't really do anything about it. But I mean, that's just, yeah, just making excuses. I mean, how could you not know that that was wrong, that you're living a total double life? I mean, if you think people back then were that stupid, then why do you trust them with what they wrote in the Constitution? I mean, of course, he knew that was wrong, but he just didn't care. He had the power to do it, and so he did it. I mean, he lived with contradictions, such as, like, he had a daughter by this Sally Hemings, who happened to be mostly white. So when she finally got old enough, he encouraged her to go north and pass as a white person. He knew it wouldn't work like down south because they had so many laws. They're like, if you have so many drops of black blood, you are considered a black person no matter what. So he encouraged her to go north and just like reinvent herself basically as a white person. So like he had all this planned out and thought out, so you can't convince yourself that he had no idea what was going on. And So basically, like, none of us are perfect. Like, we all have these contradictions and stuff that we live with, but we shouldn't just act like some people are above that and like so great or whatever. Right. So I thought one of the things I would kind of do in this video is just recommend some things that really influenced me. So you might want to like get familiar with the pause button there and have your cursor right there on your computer, and then have your pencil and paper out, or have another window open in your computer where you can take notes. I'm not going to like spell everything out or anything, so you might have to do some research about finding some of the stuff. But yeah, I would just encourage you. There's a lot of great books on Bard, the Library for the Blind, like great audiobooks about Sally Hemings. You can look up and read her very fascinating story that was Thomas Jefferson's Black Mistress, or you can read about this daughter he had that actually had to go north to pass as a white person. And so, yeah, I suppose you're all going to miss me next month when I'm not around. So here are some books that you can read in the meantime to just kind of get, like maybe you haven't been exposed to some of these topics before. And reading is just a great way to learn, especially like historical fiction, because it's very well researched. Like the facts of the book are true, but yet it's written in such a way where it's like more entertaining or just more fun and easy to read. So one of the first books kind of along these lines that I read was called The Chaperone by Laura Moriarty. And it's about this woman in the 1920s. She was like in her 40s at that time. And it just kind of shows all the changes that she was going through. Like prohibition was going on at that time, and it shows how her views kind of changed on that whole thing, or how her views changed on things like gay couples, because just a lot of moral and social changes were taking place at that time. So you can kind of ride along with this one woman and see how her perspective changed, and it just gives you an idea of all that took place throughout history that we kind of take for granted today. And then another book that I read was called The Immortal Irishman, which you can also get on Bard. It's by Timothy Egan. And it's just eye-opening on several levels about a guy born in Ireland during the horrible droughts that they had back more than a century ago, more like 2 centuries ago. There were these horrible droughts and the big potato famine and everything, which is what caused a lot of Irish people to come here. This famine, though, was actually caused by the British who owned Ireland at that time. Like, Ireland was a colony of the British, and the British literally sold their food away from them. Like, they would force the Irish to plant their own fields and whatever, but then the Irish would come in and take the food away. And it was just a society of landowners who owned all this land in Ireland. They were actually British, though, and then they basically turned the Irish into slaves, and they actually worked as serfs, basically, for the British, who kept them poor. Like, they kept them under their thumb. That's the only way they could keep ruling over them. So yes, in some ways they actually caused this famine too. Like, they planted some of these potatoes that they knew were diseased and they knew would spread this, which is what caused so many of the potatoes to die, and just to keep the Irish under their thumb. And so yes, of course, the Irish were very depressed and they drank a lot. They like drank their troubles away, or tried to, just to get through the day. And this is all like totally well researched and documented. Like, Timothy Egan explains all this, how it all happened in his book. So this book is actually about Thomas Francis Marr, who rebelled against, he was like an Irishman, and he was very rebellious against against the British, and how so he was like speaking out against them, and was just so rebellious and was trying to get the rest of the Irish to rebel. So the British finally caught up with him and put him in jail, and actually sent him off to Tasmania, Australia, as a prisoner. And he had just many adventures and whatever there. It's just a fascinating book because he had led like so many different lives in so many different places. Because from there, he finally made his way to America, basically by stowing away aboard a ship. And in America, of course, he was greatly admired for like rebelling against the British, and people there just thought he was a great hero. And he was made a general in our Civil War here. And after, and he was like, he was fought for the North, of course, against the South, who was enslaving people. And after that, he did such a great job in the war that he was appointed governor of the state of Montana, which wasn't actually quite a state yet then. He was, it was like it's still a territory, but they wanted him to like come out here to the Wild West, to Montana, and be governor. So he made his way to Montana, where a bunch of rebels from the South had escaped from the Civil War. Like the Montana is basically kind of a little picture of the country because we had people here from both the North and the South. And so these Southerners, of course, were bitter about having lost the war, and they basically formed a vigilante state. Like they would just drag people out of their homes and hang them. They weren't, of course, very friendly to black people and drove them out whenever they could. They insisted that we have Southern Confederacy flags planted all over the place. Here to celebrate the South. They wanted to like try to convince people that the South had actually won the war. That kind of sounds familiar. The way some people talk about the last election, they just are in total denial of who actually win things. They were just a lot of their renegade descendants are still around today. Like I was always wondering, why do so many people in their ranch houses or whatever, they have big Confederate flags planted out in front of their property to this very day. And then I learned more about this Montana history, and the descendants of these Southern renegades still live here and still have that mindset. So we have like the Jefferson Davis Mountains here that are literally named after Jefferson Davis, the leader of the Southern Confederate Army who lost, but yet we have mountains here named after him like he was some sort of great hero. In fact, a year ago, I was at a church where the pastor was singing the praises of the Jefferson Davis and his mountains and saying how happy he was that we could look out the window and see these great glorious mountains named after this great glorious hero. That was coming from the pulpit. Some people do just focus more on the military aspect or like states' rights or just different things that they put the focus on, but yet you just can't deny the overall what the meaning of the Civil War was about. Right, that's what he was saying, that Jefferson Davis, you have to say one thing about him, he fought for freedom. He fought for states' rights. Freedom? The people that literally owned slaves, you're trying to convince yourself they were fighting for freedom? Freedom maybe for the white rich people again, but certainly not freedom for poor people, not freedom for slaves. It's just like one little aspect they decide to focus on. They like totally deny. How can you claim to love God and love your fellow man and everything when you're just fine with people owning other people and all the misery that caused? We just totally conveniently forget about what they were actually fighting for and try to just sell it as states' rights or whatever that means. The country would be in total chaos if each state could literally just do whatever it wanted. These are the things that some people love to whitewash away now. Like Bannock is the capital of Montana, and that's where a bunch of drunk gold diggers lived back then in the late 1800s, who got in constant gun fights, took the law into their own hands. Marr that I was talking about from this Timothy Egan book, he died under very mysterious circumstances. He had lots of political enemies. Um, so yeah, you can read most of Timothy Egan's books on Bard or on Audible. You can get audio books, which I really love in a lot of these cases because they just can make their voices into the different accents and make it more entertaining. Another book that Timothy Egan wrote, his most recent book, is called Fever in the Heartland, the Ku Klux Klan's plan to take over America and the woman who stopped them. That's another very fascinating book you should look up. Or Richard Wheeler's Westerns. He just writes a lot of Western books. A lot of them take place here in Montana, where I live. And he just writes about how horribly and unjustly the Montanans treated the Native Americans. And so they're fiction written in story novel format, which just helps you really experience the thoughts and feelings of these people and see them as real people, not just as numbers or statistics in a history book. I think people who don't read are just totally missing out on this kind of perspective. Like even from TV shows, you can't get as deeply into like how these people thought and felt. You're just kind of seeing the actions that they took, but you can't always tell what's behind them. So I really encourage reading, and now that's available to anybody because anybody can listen to an audiobook. So I just that's an interest I think everybody should take up. You can easily get audiobooks now, and novels by Christian Hanna, like the Four Winds, are just interesting to ponder because they like that one book is about a family who lived through the Dust Bowl and made their way to California and how horribly they were treated there. The word Okie was actually a slur that was used back then. This because of all these Oklahomans who were desperately trying to escape the Dust Bowl during the Dirty 30s, and so they would go like to California. And so one of the things I noticed reading this book was that the exact same things were said about them back then as are said about immigrants now. That they were dirty and lazy and taking our jobs. The landowners, of course, used and abused them and make them work practically for nothing. Kept lowering their wages to keep them under their thumb. But in that case, it was just very fascinating because it was white Americans against other white Americans. Like it's just the foreigners that the people who are comfortably already in the place resent them coming in, even though it's literally other white people. They had the same attitudes toward them as we do towards quote unquote foreigners today. So we can make anyone the outsider, and they kept them poor and dirty. And so just like read some of these books and see if it doesn't change your perspective just a little bit. See if you don't learn something in a fun way. You can listen to podcasts. Like one of them is called The Dollop, which also covers a lot of history and a lot more recent history. And it's just very well researched. It gives you links to everything they cover so you can look at it for yourself and see if you agree or disagree. But it's just presented in a very fun way. They cover more recent history, and they point out how these men in charge are just human. Many times they're uneducated, good old boy redneck types who just happen to be in the right place in the right time to get leadership positions. And they were just like born into their position out of pure luck, which they abuse horribly, and how racism is still going strong and until recently was largely just accepted, not even noticed, because we say, well, we already fought for civil rights. They don't have their own drinking fountains anymore, and they don't have their own separate schools anymore, so what more could they want? But our laws have kept them down, just like the British laws kept the Irish down. It's like really no different, and these things can have effects for generations. There's just horrible stories in our past and present. You can Google Emmett Till and read his story and what happened to him, and that didn't happen that long ago. He died in 1955, And so we are just definitely not squeaky clean as a country, which reading history will show you. Martin Luther King, he was the horrible way he was treated back in his day. So today we look at him as a hero, but in his actual day, back when he was alive doing his thing, people like he had many enemies. People literally were trying to kill him. They were trying to send the FBI after him, putting him in jail. I mean, obviously he was shot, but that wasn't just like one crazy lunatic that shot him. It was like half of the country was against him. So today we all just think that, oh, great, Martin Luther King came along and everybody learned their lesson, but that's really not how it was. So our kids need to know this stuff about our history and how things actually were so that they can have empathy and keep fighting for a better world. I mean, because we've never arrived, we always should be fighting to make improvements. There's never just a time when, oh, now we've done anything, now we've gotten there. We should always just keep up the good fight. Our kids, of course, don't need to be told the horrible parts in graphic detail. We can still instill a love of America. That's not hard to do because we do have a great country, and we should still point out the great parts about America too, the same way that we instill like team spirit or school spirit, not because we are the best team or the best school in the universe, but just because this is our team or this is our country and this is where we were born. So we can still be proud of that, but we can still be realistic about that we are not the best or we're not perfect just because it's our team or our school. And we can all work to make it better. It doesn't mean that we have to hate ourselves. We can just tell these heroic, rather than like focusing on the hatred parts, we can tell the story of our heroes, but hopefully we will start looking for maybe a few different heroes than what we've focused on in the past. We can tell the stories of Martin Luther King and the people who stood behind him and the people who actually supported him back in the day. They are all heroes also. So that's one way that we can instill pride in our kids is by telling them the stories of heroes, and our kids should hear. It's still working. They should hear both the good and the bad. And I was fortunate to be born in America on the right side of the tracks, and I'm thankful for that heritage. My grandfather was born in different times, and he was born in times where he was able to buy up hundreds of acres of land. I mean, that's basically impossible today. Nobody just starting out in life today is just going to be able to go out and buy land. But he was fortunate to live in a time where he was able to go out and do that. And because of that, now we're benefiting from that, because now it passed down to us, even though we did really nothing to deserve it. And now, of course, it's worth much, much more money than it was back in his day. So the benefits of that is totally undeserved on our part. We just got lucky. And there's no harm in recognizing things like that. Like our kids should be told the circumstances that they were born into, like somebody growing up in the slums of New York at the same time as my grandfather. They didn't have the opportunity to just kind of buy up land and pass it down to their descendants. So that's just things that we can casually point out to our kids, like, wow, weren't we lucky to have this opportunity? And because of that, we should be more thoughtful of people that didn't have that opportunity. So sure, he lived through hard times, my grandfather, because of course things were just harder in many ways back in his day. And he worked very hard on that land to preserve it. And then my dad got it and he worked very hard on it too, just like the people in every generation do. There's no such thing as a generation that has it easy. I mean, anyone who tells you that has a very shallow worldview. Every generation has their own set of very different problems. So, I mean, I think our generation does have a lot of things easier than previous generations. Yeah, but not according to some. Like some think, oh, now we have the internet and that is just destroying people or whatever. I mean, it just kind of depends what you focus on. Plus, nowadays it's harder for kids to get started in life. Like many of them do have to live at home longer just because they can't live on their own because it's more expensive. Like not one person today has the opportunity to buy acres of land basically with no money just by working hard and landing a good opportunity. That could never happen to somebody today. It's hard enough to just find a small apartment that you can afford to rent, much less anything else. So we can try not to repeat the mistakes of the past, and that's simply by knowing about the past. How can we correct something that we don't even know about? So I just find it a rich and fulfilling experience to study history, and I hope you'll feel the same. Thank you. Okay, and I'll try to also post a link in the description to a talk that she gave at her church yesterday. And so I posted a link before, but I think the one that you'll see on this episode when I get it published, it will just be her mainly, that she'll start at the very beginning, because like on the other video, she started way after the fact, and the first few minutes were like blank, so some of you may have thought the video wasn't working correctly or whatever, but I will post that in the description if I remember. Hopefully I will. So if you really want to hear another Convos with Kim in December or whatever, you can always click that link as well and hear all about her spiritual journey and stuff. And the congregation seemed to really appreciate it and whatnot. So I hope you will too, and be sure to like, subscribe, comment. Like if you've read any of the books or intend to read any of the books that she mentioned, be sure to let us know. That would be awesome, because we really appreciate any feedback. And thanks very much for watching. Oh dear.